Our speaker is Renée Ford, a postdoctoral fellow at Aarhus University in Denmark. She presents her talk on the topic, What's Love Got to Do with It? Descriptions of Understanding Love in the Kathmandu Valley, Nepal. Renée Ford is a postdoctoral fellow at Aarhus University in Denmark as part of the European Research Council, ERC, funded project Heart Openings, Cultivation and Experience of Love in Religious Traditions, Islam, Buddhism and Christianity. She is also affiliated with the University of North Carolina at Wilmington and Rangjung Yeshe Institute. Her research focuses on the interplay between Tantra and Dzogchen, Ardzogs Chen, in the heart essence, vast expanse, Klongchen's Nying Thig, literature in Nyingma, or Nying Mi, lineages. She has also translated a few texts from Tibetan to English, including the third Dodrupchen's The Staircase That Leads to Lotus Light. Essential Instructions on Guru Yoga. Today, she will give a talk on the topic, What's Love Got to Do with It? Descriptions of Understanding Love in the Kathmandu Valley, Nepal.
Yes, so my presentation is titled, What's Love Got to Do with It? Descriptions of Understanding Love in the Kathmandu Valley. And this presentation is really going to focus on some preliminary fieldwork that I've done with a larger project that is called Heart Openings, Experience and Cultivation of Love in Religious Traditions. So I'll just talk about that first before I move forward. The whole project of itself is trying to look at different cultures, Sufis in Egypt, Buddhists in Denmark, also Christians, Pentecostal Christians in Denmark, and also Pentecostal missionaries in Tanzania. Also in secular communities within Denmark, the commune or maybe community, and also community members in Papua New Guinea, and trying to gather experiences and stories of people's expressions of love and however that they understand that to be. And all of this is being spearheaded by our PI, Christian Soor, who's an anthropologist at Aarhus University. And so my sub-project is really focusing on Tibetan Buddhist practitioners. And it's quite a broad umbrella because we're also looking at maybe what we considered Western converts who are not culturally Tibetan or speak Tibetan, but they can consider themselves and identify as Tibetan Buddhist meditators, and then also people within Nepal. And so it opens up a broad category without trying to define who is Tibetan Buddhist from our side, but in the sense of listening to the practitioners themselves and how they identify as that. And just to introduce the methodology that we're using as a whole, three kind of stand out. First, a visual anthropology, which is allowing us to capture the nonverbal components of a story and experience. And so I've seen within some of my participants' abilities to gesture or seeing tears form or a general sensibility that is beyond the words that they can express at the moment. Secondly, we're including life story interviews to bring in context of another type of interview that I will introduce briefly in a minute, but just to learn a little bit about their past and maybe their future, and to get an idea of how to situate them as humans, really, right? Because we all come with a story, and sometimes understanding our experiences of love is important to know the full story. And thirdly, we're using microphenomenology interviews, which might sound like a very strange concept, but what it does is an interview that focuses on a very short moment of experience. And instead of just hearing the historical part of a story or something of what I've done, this type of interview process allows us to open and give space to an experience to know the how. So I could take a drink of coffee And this type of interview could let me go into expressing, how do I taste that coffee? How do I know it tastes hot? Does it burn my tongue? Is there fuzzy things on my tongue? Do I feel it slip down to the back of my throat? And so on. So we're getting some very rich descriptions from people explaining or expressing their experiences. So these are the three methodologies that we're using as a larger group, and I'm also using as a smaller sub-project group. And for today's purposes, trying to work with these methodologies with individuals in Nepal. And yes. So just to focus here, there's a group of nuns that I've been working with and trying to see how their experiences are expressed in contemplative practices, how these contemplative practices relate to their understandings and experiences of love or other sorts of expressions that might be close to this. And I think another really important question here to ask, and the one I have been asking my participants, is how is the word love received in Nepal? I just have to say that being there and people find out that just the title of this research project, they're very open to sharing their understanding of the word love. And I would say within the first few sentences, I hear often that love is different in Nepal, that it's different than it is in the West. And then going on to explain often that life is really hard. Maybe they don't hear the words, I love you as much from their parents or otherwise. Or there's not as much hugging and kissing. So they want to tell me that it's different. And so I think to understand these differences and to understand more of the context, looking into other ways of asking into these questions and experiences. So I said earlier, I'm working with a group of nuns at Tekcholi Nunnery, which is a nunnery that was created by a Tibetan Buddhist. The nunnery itself was created in the early 2000s. However, the Tibetan Buddhist teacher, Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso Rinpoche, came into Nepal around 1960 through Bhutan, which sits just east of Nepal. Sikkim of northern India sits in between them as borders. So he came down with a few nuns that he had known into Tibet, and due to the Cultural Revolution in China, they fled Tibet and came down through and settled into Nepal. And he built several nunneries in Bhutan and throughout Nepal. And finally, this one was built in the early 2000s. And so we have a group of nuns from the ages of 5 all the way up to a few of them who came down from Tibet in the 1960s. So it's a wide range of individuals living together. And here is an image of them doing a retreat, a meditation practice on a deity called Avalokiteshvara or Chinrezi, known as Lord of Compassion. So they're actively doing things to cultivate compassion for all living beings. So they spend a lot of time cultivating this sense of relating to other beings and cultivating compassion. And just to situate this a little bit, I put in some markers of their larger international community. So here we can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but we have the nunnery in Nepal, and then just east, there's another one in Bhutan. And then there's international community members who come from Taiwan and Indonesia, Canada, and the United States that come to visit and will pray sometimes at the monastery, the nunnery, and make donations. So it's a large web of community members supporting the nunnery. I think for time, I'll go through this, but I wanted to just show a few examples that I have of different types of interviews that I've had with the nuns so far, just to kind of open up their experiences and raising the question, how do we relate this to love if we can? I think on one level, we see an affective care, what I will talk to you about in a minute. but I raised the question first, how can these experiences be related to this idea of love? So for Ani Dachin, I was able to do a microphenomenology interview with her, and I asked her a question that relates to a spiritual practice that talks about feeling her teacher in front of her. So just for context, her physical teacher lives at the nunnery with her and the other nuns in a room high above the other rooms. He's lived there for a long time. Many people aren't able to see him anymore because he's very old. But so there is a physical presence of the teacher, but also the spiritual practices also incorporate the sense of seeing one's teacher in front of them. So I asked Ani Dachin to feel her teacher in front of her. And when she did, then if she could tell me how she experienced this moment. And her reply was that when she feels her teacher or lama in that moment, that it's the same as it is any time, that she feels joyful, blessed, and that he's actually on the crown of her head. And so with these, and also feels a sense of happiness. So there is what I might call a felt sense that she can feel into her teacher's presence when she imagines him. And then also this felt presence has an affect. And so there's a sense of connecting or relating to her teacher, even if he's not physically present with her. So this is one example. And
Excuse me, I'm sorry
yes.
to interrupt, but will you please conclude fast because we are running out of time.
Okay, yes. All right. So I'll just one more and then I'll conclude. So another discussion with another nun is that she talked about being at the nunnery and relating that to what it's like to live at the nunnery, and that she feels that they are part of her own family, and feels this way because they can share problems, they have the same thoughts, and they're all nuns, and that they can connect to one another. And just as my third example, kind of showing a flip situation in the sense, talking to Ani Changchup, a third nun, how was it that when she first came to the nunnery, how did that feel? And she explained that it felt lonely, she didn't know anyone, and as slowly time passed, it started to feel like a second home. So I bring all of these up because I think, without the sense that they are expressing the word love in their experiences, that we can start to bring them into understanding how might they relate to the word love, a sense of connecting and relating. We've heard even just today a few other talks about how connection and relating are parts of a definition of love, but also bringing in the sense that the word love for a Tibetan Buddhist philosophical perspective does not necessarily match the definitions that we have in English. So I'm opening up this understanding of how do we understand love in different cultural context. Thank you so much. Yeah, so far to the women that I have spoken with, most of them have come as parents' decisions, but also some of them within that parent decision also talked about how they were inspired to be at the nunnery. And that second part, they also gave a disclaimer in the sense, well, this is our memory of it, so maybe we are painting it to be maybe more romantic. But yeah, and just to add on to that, while I was there was a new young nun who was 5. Her mother worked in the kitchen and decided to bring her daughter to the nunnery. So I think we have to suspend a little bit of our understandings of how this works in talking, because I imagine if your question is coming from a sense of trauma or choice,